have a war plan. They have a plan how to beat the Russians. Many of these countries were never occupied by the Russians, yeah? So they don't have physical, personal experience. What does it mean to have a war with Russia?
In the corridors of power in Brussels and Budapest alike, a slow-burning confrontation is gathering force. A confrontation not just of policy, but of identity, allegiance, and direction. At its heart stands Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister, facing down the European Union's institutions as he positions his country for what may be the most pivotal election of his career. This is the stage on which the future of Europe may well be decided. Welcome to EU Politics, and if you haven't yet, hit subscribe to EU Politics now, because the stakes have never been higher. Orban has repeatedly declared that Hungary should not adopt the euro, declaring that the EU is disintegrating, and warning that tying Hungary's fate more closely to Brussels would leave it vulnerable. With the 2026 Hungarian parliamentary election shimmering on the horizon, a moment that could redefine the trajectory of both Hungary and the EU, Orban is making his stand visible. Reuters. What is the nature of the clash? It is multi-layered. It is about energy and sanctions. It is about national sovereignty and supranational policy. It is about elections and alliances. It is about whether Europe remains a bonded union of collective action or dissolves into a collection of sovereign states acting independently. Consider this. Hungary is heavily dependent on Russian energy supplies, and Orban's government has signaled it will resist external pressure to sever ties. At a conference in Moscow in mid-October 2025, Hungary's foreign minister made it clear that cutting off Russia would harm Hungary, and by implication, the EU's push to wean itself from Russian energy. Elsewhere, Orban is openly working on how to circumvent upcoming US sanctions on Russian oil companies, telling state radio his government is working on how to circumvent this sanction. Reuters. The European Union, on the other hand, is working to maintain a united front in the face of Russia's war in Ukraine, economic shocks, and the shifting geopolitics of energy and defense. At its most recent summit, EU leaders pledged financial backing for Kyiv for the next 2 years. But Hungary, under Orban, withheld full support. The gulf is widening. Reuters inside Hungary. Orban is mobilizing his base. On 23rd October, tens of thousands filled a central square in Budapest as he accused Brussels of wanting a puppet government in Hungary, painting the choice in next year's election as one between peace or going to war for Ukraine. His message: Hungary will decide its own path. Reuters. For viewers of this channel, EU Politics, and for anyone who cares about Europe's direction, the question is clear. What happens if one member state not only rejects, but confronts the collective will of 27-state union? What happens when Brussels must choose between enforcing its policies and preserving its solidarity? Let's walk through the story. First, a little backstory. Hungary joined the EU 2 decades ago, benefited from billions in structural funds, and locked itself into the European single market. But today, Orban argues that the conditions of membership are shifting. He says that adopting the euro would lock Hungary further into a system he deems unstable. He said Hungary should not tie its fate closer to the European Union than now, and adopting the euro would be the closest possible link. That remark is a signal of how far his divergence runs. Reuters. Second, consider Orban's energy strategy. In a continental landscape where energy security, climate transition, and sanctions loom large, Hungary's refusal to break Russia's energy dependency stands out. In Moscow, at the Russian Energy Week Forum, Szijjártó told the world that Hungary would suffer if cut off, a statement at odds with most of Orban's EU neighbors. Then there are the US sanctions, because the US counts as one of the world's big levers in energy and diplomacy. Hungary is already positioning itself. Reuters. Third, the domestic electoral front. With 2026 looming, Orban has already launched cheap loan programs for small and medium Hungarian businesses at a fixed 3% interest as a way to shore up support ahead of what analysts call his toughest election in years. Meanwhile, opposition parties plea for change, pointing to democracy, rule of law concerns, and Hungary's place in Europe. Reuters. And then there's the Ukraine dimension. The EU has signaled that for Ukraine to proceed toward membership, all 27 members must agree. Hungary has positioned itself as the stumbling block, citing Hungarian minority language rights among its reasons. This is not a side note, it's a flashpoint for how unified Europe can stay when a member wields its veto. Reuters. So what does all this add up to? A man, Viktor Orban, who has stood in power since 2010, seeking to rewrite the terms of Hungary's relationship with Europe. A European Union grappling with whether it can enforce collective goals when one member turns up its own volume and dials down compliance. Let's zoom out for a moment. From Barcelona to Warsaw, from Lisbon to Helsinki, people are watching. They see the rules of the game changing. In Brussels, the question is, do we push Hungary to comply, or do we tolerate divergence to preserve the union? The danger is that either path carries risk. If Brussels chooses confrontation, it risks alienating Hungary and maybe others. If it chooses tolerance, it risks seeing its collective policies unravel. And the cracks are already visible. Energy supply chains, defense readiness, sanctions regimes, national elections. For you, viewer of EU politics, this isn't just remote geopolitics. When Hungary negotiates around sanctions or energy, prices may rise. When the EU debates Ukraine's membership, the whole security architecture of Europe is in motion. When national elections shift the balance of power, policy changes follow. Let's return to Budapest. At his rally, Orban accused the EU of wanting war rather than peace. He said Brussels seeks to squeeze Ukraine into the EU at any price, to bring war into Europe, and take EU money to Ukraine. That rhetoric resonates in some quarters. For many Hungarians with restless economies and uncertain futures, the message is simple. Protect our country, keep costs down, don't let foreign conflicts decide our fate. Reuters. But what if the domestic prospect fails? What if Hungary's economy falters further? Then, Orban may face a tougher fight. The opposition is organizing. Voices are rising. For Brussels, it would prefer a cooperative Hungary, not a defiant one. But the options are limited. As the countdown to 2026 continues, the Hungarian experience may hold lessons for Europe broader. If one country can resist, others may follow. If national interests trump collective policy, the architecture of the EU weakens. To survive and thrive, Europe must demonstrate two things: clarity of purpose and fairness in burden sharing. Clarity of purpose means the EU must articulate what membership means in practical terms. Not just speeches, but what happens when a member diverges. Fairness means that if one member bears more burden in sanctions, energy transition, or defense, it must also share the decision-making power and receive tangible support. Hungary argues it pays its dues, literal and figurative, but it wants control. It wants to decide when and how to cooperate. Orban asserts that national interest is first. The EU insists collective interest is first. The battle lines are drawn as we wrap up this deep dive for EU politics. And if you found value in this, please hit subscribe to EU Politics and share this video so more people engage with the future of Europe. Remember, the next time you hear about energy bills rising, sanctions imposed, borders debated, remember they're not just local issues. They're the surface ripples of decisions being made in places like Budapest and Brussels. Because if Viktor Orban wins his gamble, Hungary may chart its own course, and Europe may be forced to adjust. If the EU holds firm, the prize is a more unified, resilient Europe, but only if it acts consistently, fairly, and right now. In the end, the contest is more than politics. It's about trust. It's about whether 27 nations can walk in step, or whether they'll start stepping out of line. And for every person in Europe, that choice will touch their wallet, their security, their future. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned to EU Politics for more analysis, and don't forget to subscribe.